here we go. Good afternoon. My name is Paulo Sotero. I am the director of the Brazil Institute here at the Woodrow Wilson Center, and it gives me great pleasure to greet Minister Dyogo de Oliveira at the Wilson Center this afternoon. I think, Minister, you are the first member of the cabinet to visit the Wilson Center since the installation of the new government. Obviously, the questions, and you are certainly hearing many of them in your meetings, in the international financial community representatives. We have here a number of friends that work at some of the international organizations, a number of my colleague journalists. Some more people should be coming, but it is a pleasure, it's an honor to receive you here. The minister is from the great state of Tocantins, one of the newest states in Brazil. He has degrees in economics from the University of Brasilia, from the National School of Administrations, whose president, my dear friend Chico Gaetani, will be in town next week. And he has made his career totally in the public sector, working for different areas in the economic ministries in Brasilia. We are very happy to have you here and to be able to give you the stage to tell us what are the main directions of what seems to be your main responsibility to get a hold of the fiscal situation in Brazil. Here in the United States, people know what the planning minister is the budget ministry. Here you have the name, is the office of budget. We are conscious that the latest and the first results, electoral results since the impeachment episode, produce certain outcomes that personally I am still putting information together to write an analysis of that. It seems to be to reinforce the message that we need to change, that the unfortunate process of having to remove a president by impeachment is the second time we do this in 24 years. This is really not healthy to a democracy. We keep repeating that process. But it was, in my view, and I wrote about this, inevitable under the circumstances. And the first electoral test after that episode seems to suggest that Brazilian citizens favor reform. Whether the government will have the wisdom, the courage to tackle those reforms is another issue, and that's, I think, because those are very difficult reforms. We have been saying here there is a political system in Brazil that has basically run its course, the presidentialism by coalition. There is an economic model also that probably has run its course, depending on ever-growing funds from the government. Over the past 20 years, expenditures from the central government has only gone up, and now they have to, according to a proposal that the government tabled, they have to stop, and we are going to have this very, very difficult issue. We have presented it here, I don't know if correctly or not, as something that will take years. This is not a 2 months, 3 months. This is a process. I think we will be able to see if we are successful or not, maybe in 5 years. And this is the context that I wanted to present to our friends, because this is the context that I think corresponds to reality in Brazil. And with that, Minister, I will offer you the floor to make introductory remarks, and then what we like to do here, as I told you, here at the Wilson Center, we pride ourselves to produce light and not heat in our debates. So we want people to engage because we understand the complexity of the making and implementation of public policy. Welcome. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Paulo. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for the initial remarks. I think you pointed out very important issues about Brazil now. I will try to keep the presentation in up to 30 minutes so that we can have space for a longer debate, and I'll be at your disposal to answer the questions. So, as Paulo just mentioned, we just finished the process of impeachment, and there is a new government in place. And this process has been very costly for the Brazilian economy. But we start to see important change in the expectations after I would say that after the beginning of the process. There was a very deep deterioration during the last year up to the beginning of the process of impeachment, and then the expectations start to recover. And it goes to mainly the most important economic variables. Starting with inflation, you see that the expectations by February were a higher inflation for all the years to come than we have right now. It mainly dropped by 1%, the expectation of inflation. If you look at the GDP expectation, you see that they are higher now than they were in the beginning of the year. For all the years in the framework. We also have the confidence index recovery. You see, let's say we were in the bottom of the index during the last year and the beginning of this year, but from April to now, there is a very strong growth in the confidence index. If you take a look at the intention of investments, you see also a growth in the intention of investment in the economy, starting from the last quarter. If you look at the CDS for Brazil, it were at the top by the end of March, and now it is going, I would say, quickly to a level compatible with the level that we had during the period of investment grade. If we are going to get at the average or not, it's a question, but it's clear now that we are closer to the average that we had of CDS during the period where Brazil were considered investment grade. Well, and the exchange of São Paulo captured this movement by growing almost 20,000 base points from February to this point now. So I start the presentation showing that there is an important movement in Brazil of regaining confidence and credibility of the economy and in the government itself. And it is a response, to my view, not only for the change for itself, but for it's a response to the agenda that were presented by the new government. It's an agenda of reforms, starting with a reform that we are going to present that try to put in place a roof for the growth of the expenditures of the government. But it's also an important change in the whole management of the economic policy, which now it's more clear for the agents. It's more transparent about the data of the fiscal situation of the country. And there's a movement of fiscal consolidation that starts immediately and it will go on during several years. It's a very different situation when we compare with other moments that Brazil has entered in a major economic reform or a change in the economic policy, because the other episodes were mainly inflationary episodes. Let's take the real plan, for example. When we implement the plan, there is a perception quite immediately in the real economy and in the people's life. This will be kind of different. It will be a long period of adjustment, and the perception in the people's life will not be as immediate that it was in other periods, in other plans. But we are convinced that the situation that we are at this moment demands. Oh, sorry. What we had by the last 20 years was a continuous growth of the expenditures of the government when compared to the GDP. And it's important to say that it has no links with the economic cycle or to political cycle. You see, every president has left the expenditure 2% of GDP higher than the previous. You see, President Fernando Henrique started with something around 14 and left with 16. President Lula started with 16, left with 18. And President Rousseff started with 18 and left with 20. So you see that there is a route to this process. There is not directly linked with the decisions that every president has made. We should look deeper to understand what's going on. And you'll see that the next, I'm always touching the wrong button, but now it's okay. You see that one of these routes is exactly the social security system, which also has been growing continuously from 97 to now, from something around 5% of GDP to something more than 8% of GDP right now. So only the social security expenditure accounts for half of the growth of the total expenditure in the government in this period. But more than that, you see that the deficit of the social security system in Brazil has been growing very fastly in the late 4 to 5 years. It was 0.9% in 2013, and now we are something around 2.7% of GDP for the next year. So it's a very rapidly growth, and it demands action from the government again. So what we proposed is the initial proposal was a constitutional amendment to establish that for the next 10 years, the expenditures of the government will be roofed, will be limited to the growth of the last year's expenditure plus inflation. Well, everybody knows that the GDP will grow above the inflation, so this means that during this period, the relation between expenditure and the GDP must fall. How much will be this fall will, of course, depends on the performance of GDP, but if we consider a growth about 2.5% of GDP in the next few years, it may drop 5% of GDP in the next 10 years. So it would go back to the level of 1997. And will produce this pattern will produce stabilization of the debt. After this period of the 10 initial years, the president in place will have the option to change the rule for the 10 years to come. And of course, the amendment foreseeing that if you exceed the limits, there will be some consequences, and the government will not be able to hire new servants or to increase the salary, and other prohibitions like to create new tax incentives or increase social benefits above inflation. So this amendment, it's not enough itself to prevail the expenditure to growth in at the speed that we had in the last 20 years, but it's the first step of the process. Just tomorrow, we expect to have the first decision of the Congress about the amendment. The process in Brazil, I don't know if you are aware, but constitutional amendments must be voted in a special commission of the Congress. Then it goes to the law chamber. It has to be voted twice in the law chamber, and then it goes to the Senate, and it has to be voted twice in the Senate also. So tomorrow we expect to have the first vote at the special commission, and I would say that there were no major change in what was presented by the government. So the first step is in movement, and we are working now. We are just preparing major reform in the social security system that will be presented. We expect to present it by the end of this month or the beginning of the next month, but we are sure that it will be presented this year. Well, just to show our concerns and why we believe that this has to be done, we just made a forecast what would happen if we had, for the next 10 years, the growth of expenditures in different levels. So the proposal of the amendment is zero growth above inflation, which is the lowest line. And you see that even in this case, the total debt may grow up to around 80% of GDP, and then it starts slightly descending about 24, 25. It will go down. The other patterns all show that the debt can have a continuous growth undefined in this period. So what this slide shows is that it is quite correct with optimistic scenario, which is the growth of GDP stabilizing 2.5% a year. we will have a growth in the debt up to 22, 23, and only by that we will have a slightly decrease in the GDP. So this is the main concern that moves the government into this direction. So what we see is that the expenditures has been growing continuously. The debt is increasing rapidly, and we need to put in place a strong fiscal adjustment program. But we cannot do that in 1 year or just in 2 years, because from other questions, but the main concern now is that we also have a recession in the country, which is the biggest recession in the history. We may finish this year with a recession of 3% of GDP after 3.7 drop in the GDP last year. So it is the second time that Brazil will have 2 years of drop in GDP. The last time it was in 1930 and 1931. So it's not affordable to have a strong cut in the expenditure in 1 year only. So we decided to go to a process of adjustment that will put the budget of the government in the equilibrium only in 2019. So we are expecting to have a deficit of 2.7% of GDP this year, and we are going to be at balanced budget in 2019. Along with that, we are taking several other measures to reduce the expenditure, starting with revision of several public policies and other programs in Brazil. For instance, we are revising this illness and disability insurance program that is managed by the Social Security, and we just discovered that we were spending 20 billion reais a year with this insurance program, and that more than half of that, I would say 13 billion reais a year with people that were supposedly illness for more than 2 years. So we started revising and calling back all these people to make sure they are really ill or if it's just a fraud. And other programs, important programs in Brazil, like the retirement system for the deficient and elder people, the fisherman insurance, and the Programa Bolsa Família, which is the income transfer program most known in Brazil, and also the program of it's the student credit program in Brazil. It's called FIES. So we are revising the most important programs in Brazil, trying to improve the quality of the management of those programs, trying to improve the focus, the application, the focus of the program, and other measures to reduce the cost of them. We also had, this is very difficult to explain to other countries, but in Brazil we have most of the expenditure are connected or linked to revenues. Most of the tax, they are directed by law or by the constitution to some expenditure, and from time to time Brazil has to pass an amendment in the constitution to disconnect these revenues with expenditure, so we can save part of that money by not spending it as it is foreseen in the legislation. So we passed this amendment this year also. We are going to have the 30% of this, let's say, linked expenditure will be saved. We had a renegotiation of the state's debt with the federal government, which allowed most of the state to not go into bankruptcy. We had a new law of governance of state-owned companies, which improves not only the nomination of the managers of the companies, but also several other requirements for the working of those state-owned companies. And we launched the program of investments in concessions, and it's called the partnership program. We reduced the number of ministries and commissioned positions by 4,000 positions were reduced with the cut, and take other measures to reduce the running cost of the government. And we are also selling several properties of the government that are not used for the public service. Well, I would say this is most about the fiscal consolidation and the economic policy in Brazil. And now I would like to enter a little bit to mention about the projects of investment, the opportunities, because we believe that we have to move in one direction, working in the stabilization of the economy and stabilization of the fiscal situation, but we also have to create new opportunities for growth. So we are implementing this investment partnership program with several projects of investment in infrastructure. The main guidelines of the program is to have the maximum technical rigor in the projects, trying to propose very strong and well defined projects, improve the service provision, the quality to citizens and to the productive sector, make contracts, clear contract with indicators that can be measured and increase the legal sustainability of the programs, reinforce the power of regulatory agencies. For instance, we are preparing a decree to give them more power to decide their budget, their allocation of labor force, the decisions of regulatory issues. So it's a movement, and there is also a law project in the Congress that goes in the same direction, trying to strengthen the regulatory agencies. We decided not to put into auction projects that do not have the legal and the environmental approvals. And in this program, we are going to have at least 100 days between the notice and the auction, so that the investors can have enough time to make the studies, to make the analysis of the projects, and to improve the participation of new investors. It's always easier for the incumbent companies to participate when the time is shorter. But if you want to call for new investors, the more time you give, the best. So we decided to put a limit at least 100 days. So these are the main guidelines. We are working strongly, very focused on the economic viability of the projects, trying to present only very good projects. I would not spend too much time detailing the project, but by this map you see that there are projects along all the country. In highways, we have two main projects, one in the south, which is the BR 101 and other connections that mainly connects the interior of the state of Rio Grande do Sul, which is mainly a region that produces agriculture and also machinery, to the capital of the state, Porto Alegre, and the way out to the coast through the BR 101. So this is a very interesting project of highway. Part of this is already considered to private sector and is finishing the time of concession in 2020, I think. So this is a very interesting project of concessions in the south. Also in the south we have the airport of Porto Alegre. That will be also considered. And the other highway is in the state of Goiás, connecting to the state of Minas Gerais. It's mainly a soybean production area, and this highway connects with the other highways that are already run by private sector in Uberlândia, which is a major city in the state of Minas Gerais. Well, I mentioned the airport of Porto Alegre. We also have the airport of Florianópolis, Salvador, and Fortaleza. These four airports are medium-sized airports in Brazil, but are very attractive airports. And as for now, we have received strong manifestation of interest of several investors and companies that are in this sector. We have highways. I would say that the one of the that has shown most interest of private sector is the North Highway of we called it Ferrogrão, and connects the city of Sinop in the state of Mato Grosso to the city of Miritituba, which is a port in the Madeira River. This region produces mainly soybean, and by now they are producing around 40 million tons of soybean a year. So this railway, it's very interesting for the exportation of this production. And we also have the railway of North and South Railway, which will be finished by the end of the next year, and will be considered to private sector. We also have companies that run distribution of energy in several states: Acre, Rondônia, Roraima, Piauí, Alagoas, and Goiás. And we have the new round of concessions of oil and gas, and also a new round of hydroelectric power in the state of Minas Gerais. So you see there is several opportunities in infrastructure investment in Brazil right now, and the government is moving in a direction to give more opportunity for new and also foreign investors to participate in the project, in the process of these projects. I'll let the presentation with you, where we describe more in detail the project and the schedule. I will pass through it to save some time, and just would like to mention some regulatory improvements that we are working. First, we are preparing a law to allow for new investments in existing concessions. Normally, the concession has a fixed package of investment when it's done, and now we see that some of old concessions have room for improvements in the quality of the service and to make new programs of investments. But even the law and also the contracts are not very suitable for increasing this package of investment, and we are going to need a new law to create the secure base for those investments to develop. So we are working on that, and we expect to, by the end of this month, send to the Congress a provisional measure trying to tackling these issues. The same law will also, we did not find a good name to put it in English, but in Portuguese it would be I would say a coordinated way to give back the concession to the government. Some projects that were considered to the private sector in 2013, 2014 have shown some problems. Some of them may not be viable at the level of the demand that we have at this moment, and some of them may have been over optimistic at the beginning. So we are also in this law creating conditions so that if the investor decides to cancel the project, he can give up of the project, but in a way that we mitigate the costs of doing so. So we are going to create a bridge between the old investors and the new investor, so that we can protect the concession, protect the public service, and also protect the financier that may, or in some cases the banks did not lend money, but in most of cases some banks have lended money to those projects. We also can, in some level, protect the lender in those projects that has been showing problems right now. Mainly the law is to create, because right now, by the legislation, by the contract that we have in the concessions, there are only two options. Or he can resign unilaterally, or the government can take it back, I'd say, by force. So we are trying to create a medium term, so we can resume those projects without most of the cost. Well, and we also still running a strong public investment program in mainly of infrastructure. In highways, for example, we have 1,700 kilometers under construction or improvement. In railways, we have 2,400 kilometers under construction. We have 8 projects in development in ports and 5 projects in airports. Our estimate is to spend 38 billion reais in those sectors, in those projects, between this year and 2018. Also, housing and urban infrastructure. We have several projects that accounts to to our estimation, 54 billion reais within this period of the 3 years. We also have some important and strategic projects in defense, accounting to 18 billion reais between 2016 and 2018. There are projects in several areas in the three forces. Well, these are the main projects that we are running. You can have more and more information, more detailed information through the internet in those addresses that is shown in this slide. And just as final remarks, I would say that what we are trying to do in Brazil right now is to combine a strong fiscal consolidation to restore the confidence and the credibility of the government, to create basis for the growth to come. And along with that, we are also implementing important programs of investment, trying to attract investors to improve the quality and the standard of infrastructure in Brazil. That will, by the end, affect the productivity of the country, and by this way, improving our competitiveness with other countries. This is the main strategy, and I stay available for questions that I'm sure will be helpful to understand the situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. Please identify ourselves and shoot. Who would like to go first? Juliano Basile, Jornal Valor Econômico.
I'd like to know how fast do you think that the government will be able to approve the Social Security reform? Because we don't have the proposal in the Congress yet. And also, I'd like to know if the government is going to change programs like Bolsa Família and also Seguro Defeso. Because I think that in Seguro Defeso there are many frauds in this program. So are you going to cancel Seguro Defeso? Are you going to change Seguro Defeso? And what are you going to do with Bolsa Família?
Mainly what we are doing in those two cases is to, I'll say that in English, to look into databases that the government has access, to cross those databases, to check for fraud and for misleading information. And by this way, we are going to reduce the expenditure in those programs. So this is the main action in place right now, is the cross of information that are available also in the government itself, but that were not checked before. So, for example, we can see if a person that receives Bolsa Família, if they has also received other benefits that affects the total cash that they are receiving, if they are not working in a company, if they are not working in government. So several checks that were not made in the past, now we are going to make.
And about the Social Security reform, how fast do you think that is going to be sent to Congress?
Well, it is. I don't think this is a question of time. What I think it's more important is to send the reform to the Congress after we make, I would say, a strong communication action to show the population and to show the Congress the need for this reform. What I feel right now is that Brazilians still don't understand very clearly what's going on about the social security system.
It's going to take some time.
Yes, I would say that it will take some time, but I cannot be precise about the time it will take. So, and to my opinion, it's not very important if it's sent in 1 or 2 or 3 weeks. The question is to send it in the moment that it can be approved.
Any more questions? I would like to add to this question one thing that I read some very experienced policymakers in Brazil saying that the government and the president specifically have so far failed to explain, to establish a dialogue with the Brazilian public to explain exactly what needs to be accomplished. Because without that, obviously, without explaining it to the citizens, there is no hope. Is there a strategy to do that?
Yeah. Just this week, the government will start a campaign in the media and also with some some participations in television and so on to present not only this but also the other reforms that the government is working on.
Thierry.
What about your contacts here and your, oh, sorry. Thierry Augier from Emerging Markets. We're here in Washington at the IMF and World Bank meeting. You have a catalog of investments to be made. What is the reception, or what is the quality of dialogue you have with people here? Because obviously, as you said, there's lots of expectations and there's a lot of confidence. But how to translate this confidence in investment? Because there's a lot of unknown factors. The political situation is still very uncertain. So how do investors actually commit to this program?
We are receiving good feedbacks about the program, about the projects, and about Brazil as abroad. No, what we feel is that to translate that into investment, real investment, it will still take a little time, because as you see, the expectation has already changed, but when it comes to put the money in the table, it's a different talk. And what the investors wants to see is real action. So I would say, first of all, we need to approve this amendment of that limits the expenditures. It will be the first movement that will be understood by the markets and the investors as a real action of the government. Up to now, they are they say, they show they like the way the things are going. As you see, the valuation of assets in Brazil has been very strong the last few months. So it shows that there is confidence. But when it comes to decide new investment, the investors wants to be sure that the real decisions will be made and the real actions will be taken. So I would say that what I see now is they are waiting for the first approval of this amendment in the Congress. Then the talks will come to a different level.
And that should be before the end of the year.
Yes, yes. In our plan, the amendment should be approved by the end of this year in the both chambers of the Congress, and after that we are going to start the process of the Social Security reform also. Thank you.
Yes. Marcelo Nino from Folha de São Paulo.
Just a question about Bolsa Família. How much do you expect to save with these cuts? And do you have a goal of saving?
Not yet. We are collecting the database right now. We still don't have all the database. It's I don't know if you anyone here in this room have already managed this kind of IT technology things. It always takes longer and and costs higher than they tell you at the beginning. So when we started, it was a project for a few weeks. Now it's a project for a few months, and the cost has been increasing since we started. So, but at this point, we are collecting the databases, and after that, we will be able to make assessment and set a goal of the reduction of the expenditure in this program.
Any more questions? I have one which has to do, we have been featuring a lot here at the Wilson Center, members of the Brazilian judiciary power, because of obviously what's particularly what happened to Petrobras. We had here Minister Toffoli, we had here Minister Judge Moro, we will have here in a month Ministers Teori Savasky and Gilmar Mendes. We hope to have here by December the Chief Justice, the President of the Supreme Court of Brazil, Carmen Lúcia, and we just received notice today that the Attorney General, Rodrigo Janot, will come in most likely February. I wanted to ask you, in terms of the projected investments in infrastructure and knowing the role construction companies in Brazil involved in infrastructure projects played in all those scandals, how those two things will interact. Are you confident that the bids can really proceed? Are Brazilian companies, which companies are going to be able to participate, which are not? And are foreign companies that have been trying to come into Brazil for ages and not being able to because of protectionism, are they going to be able to participate, to bid, and to offer their services to Brazil?
Well, thank you, Paulo. It is a question that always presented to me, and it's an important question. Now, we know that the major infrastructure operators in Brazil are involved by one or another way in some Lava Jato, the car wash operation. Well, first of all, Brazil has hundreds of other, let's say, lower size companies that can participate in the process. The last round of concessions, for example, there were one consortium of smaller companies that won one of the concessions in the highways. So it is possible that it happens again next time. So we also see within the Brazil companies with skills and financial structure and big enough to participate. But we are taking several measures and actions in contact with several foreigners to attract the foreign investors to participate. What we received as a feedback was very good. There are enormous interest in the airports, but and also in the electric sector. We have received people from Italy, from France, from Spain, and from United Kingdom. But it's very interesting that the United States has been a big challenge for attraction of infrastructure operators in Brazil. I also discussed that with the treasury people that we have relations and other officials from the US government. And it's very interesting that for some reason American companies has not been participating in infrastructure sector in Brazil. But to finish, I'm very confident that will be a huge number of participants in the auctions in all the sectors, because what we received from feedback from both foreigners and local companies is of great interest in the projects. Of course, that there is a debate about the details, about the financial structure, the cost of the money, and there is a lot of debates at this moment. But we are very, very strongly confident that the project will succeed.
Okay. Henrique.
Minister, what is today the big challenge to approve the PEC do Gastos in the Congress?
I'm very optimistic about that. We had some meetings this week, and even as we are here, but other officials are having meetings with Congress leaders and other congressmen, and as the I don't know how to say relator, reporter, maybe, has presented the proposal yesterday. He presented it in a very good shape, has maintained the mainly issues, and has also included in the PEC some additional provisions that helps to strengthen the amendment. And the reception within the government supporters were good. There are some issues about investment in health, but I believe that there will be an approval of this amendment. I'd say that it always takes a little time in the Congress. You have to respect this. There is a process of convincement, of discussion, dialogue. You have to respect that, but I'm very confident that the Congress will approve.
Okay. Yes. Identify ourselves.
I'm Pedro Farias from the Inter-American Development Bank, and I'm happy to hear that the government is working on to improve the governance of regulatory agencies. And there is another factor that is always pointed out by investors as one of the main factors that affect investment decisions, and it is bureaucracy, red tape, and due to the complexity, fragmentation, and poor management of public services. What's the government planning to do to improve this situation?
Well, this is always a big issue in Brazil. Particularly, it is very hard to work with the government because there is lots of bureaucracy, and what we are doing right now is to attend a request from the president that every ministry should present a program to reduce bureaucracy. So every ministry is working in-house to present a proposal for itself. So I think this may help. And well, there's several other actions of debureaucratization in place in Brazil right now. in exportation, importation, in several areas we are working on debureaucratization. But it's like the nails. The more you have to cut it every week, it grows again. When you close your eyes, you look back. Well, somebody created a new approval, a new decision, a new process. So this is a long-term process, and what is clear now is that we have to be always vigilant about that.
Yes. And then here. 1 and 2.
Sorry, Sean Garcia with the State Department. And just touching on this point, and one raised earlier about U.S. investments in the country, I think one of the issues that touches on this is the question of transparency, whether it's in the regulations that are in place or whether it's in the bidding process. And so as you're going through this process of trying to streamline regulations, open up to investment, what are you doing to make sure that those processes are transparent and accountable to foreign investors and to people working with the system?
Yeah, this is one of the main guidelines of the new process of public-private partnerships in Brazil, is to improve the transparency and the legal framework, to strengthen the legal framework, to give enough time for the investor to analyze the documents and to present the certificates they are required. So we are taking actions in several areas to improve both transparency and legal framework. We are aware of that. We know that most of the companies complain about transparency in the process, and it has been one of the main obstacles of foreign investors' participation in infrastructure in Brazil. We are aware of that. We are working on that, and by strengthening the regulatory agencies and giving more transparency and more strengthen to the legal framework that applies to the projects, we believe that this will solve or at least will improve the participation of foreigners in those projects.
Natalie, there is a person here that want to ask a question.
Hi, Clara Nogueira from Brazil Industries Coalition. A lot has been discussed in the US about sustainability and sustainable models of energy in the energy sector, and you mentioned investments in the hydroelectric energy field. Is it in the government's agenda to invest further in sustainable models within the sector of energy?
Yes, for sure. And one of the initiatives that we already taken by the BNDES is to give the most priority in the electrical energy to new sources like solar and wind power. So these two sectors will receive from BNDES the less costly funding. So there is a strong priority of Brazil to new sources of energy, and I must say that in wind power, for example, Brazil is one of the world leaders. We have a big number of wind power plants already running in Brazil, and we have for the last, I'd say, 10 years, special auctions for wind power energies. And this fostered the sector in Brazil. We have now also industrial production of equipment and machinery for wind power. So this is a sector that we are also investing in, and there is lots of opportunities in Brazil.
Any more? Well, I'll have a final question, Minister. We know that the Senate has approved a bill that relieves Petrobras from the mandatory participation in pre-salt projects. We know that there has a vote, or there was a vote scheduled in the House. We know that the management, the new management, professional management of Petrobras favors that. Is there, and we are, I imagine that is the type of news that would reinforce, would strengthen your message as you present opportunities for foreign investors to participate in Brazilian projects. Is there anything you can tell us that you heard from Planalto about when will that bill be presented to the House of Representatives, which is the only one that needs to approve it at this point?
Thank you for the question, Paulo. And we are discussing this at this very moment in the House of Representatives. People has sent me a message here saying that the discussion started just today in the House of Representatives, and we expect to approve it by tomorrow. So this would be very good news for foreign investors in Brazil. This bill that Paulo just mentioned, it avoids the Petrobras to be mandatory in all the investments in the pre-salt oil and gas exploration. And it's true that also both the government and the Petrobras favor the approval of this bill. And it's also true that this will be an important movement to regain the confidence of foreign investors in Brazil. And we are very, very, very confident that the House of Representatives will approve it by this week. So thank you for the question.
Well, my last questions provoked two other last questions.
Oh, very good.
And then we have
Hi, Tim Rideout. Thank you, Minister. Tim Rideout from the German Marshall Fund. I'm just curious, in the broader context of international trade and Mercosur and Latin America, a lot of these projects, are they geared towards sort of linking up with a broader export-oriented agenda? Is it is there a focus on EU Mercosur deal, things like that? Thanks.
I'm not sure if I get the question correct. Would you repeat,
So,
please?
I'm basically wondering, are some of these investment projects, and I know that, in the context of UNISOR, there were plans to have a rail and highway system crossing South America. How do these link up to broader sort of Brazil's export-oriented agenda, or not, or is it mostly internally focused?
Well, as I just mentioned, most of this project of railways and also the highways are connecting agriculture production areas to ports. But I would say that none of that are directly connected with Mercosur countries. You see that these projects are mainly directed to connect internal production areas in Brazil to ports, also in Brazil. I don't know if you are mentioning this because of there was a project that it still is under study between Brazil, Peru, and China to develop a railway connecting the north of Brazil with Peru and to the Pacific Ocean. It's still under study, but I would say that the first data that we received are not very, I would say, optimistic about the project. What I see is a very expensive project, and maybe the viability of this project would take a little time to be more affordable. But Brazil still's running a strong agenda of cooperation and integration with countries in the region. And just to mention about it, Brazil has regaining force in developing an international agenda for further market open and create more space for Brazilian products and around the world. So we are trying to reachieve several agreement discussions that we had in they were in a slow path, but now we're putting more strength, more power to try to develop those agreements. And well, I would say that now Brazil is more open to this kind of agreements with other countries to open markets.
The last question.
Denise Sachapon. I'm an international developer and also attorney for KCI Technologies. In August last year, the Brazilian Treasury announced that would no longer guarantee loans for states and municipalities. These loans were particularly funded by the IDB and World Bank. And so I was wondering if the federal government has any new approach on that, and also if the federal government, for the loans that were guaranteed but that have been used to pay local state social security, if the federal government plans to take any action regarding that.
Well, I'm not sure if I understood it right, but what we have now is that some states and municipalities are not do not have the necessary rank to have an approval from the Treasury. So these states and municipalities are not able to have guarantees provided from the Treasury. Other projects from states and municipalities are running normally within the system of our ministry and the Treasury. And we had the case of the state of Rio de Janeiro, which entered in default, but it will be solved by the guarantee. The Treasury has already communicated with the banks and presented them the initiatives to solve the situation. So, and along with that, we are discussing new package for the states. Some states are demanding new approvals of loans, and we are discussing with them the size of the package.
Well, with that, I would like to thank you very much, Minister Diogo de Oliveira, for coming to the Wilson Center and to share with us the priorities of the Brazilian government regarding investments, reform. We wish you good luck. We all need it. Thank you all for coming here, and please let's thank the Minister with a round of applause.
Okay. Okay, thank you all for coming. Thank you, Paulo, for the invitation. Thank you very much.